Well, a very good afternoon to you from Portsmouth Harbour. Live pictures here of HMS Queen Elizabeth in the distance there, having just a few moments ago started her journey from the Princess Royal jetty, been moved into the central portion of the harbour and will begin to spin around ahead of what's been described as a routine training deployment by the Royal Navy. Good afternoon to you wherever you are watching this BFBS Forces News programme. This is Tim Cooper with you live, and we're here at the Round Tower to watch for the next 20 or 30 minutes or so the carrier begin her journey on her deployment. So let's take in the scene. It has improved considerably weather-wise today. It's still incredibly grey, but had you been here a couple of hours ago as I was, we might as well have filmed in black and white because you could barely see anything. It was just a grey sea, grey sky, misty, drizzly rain sleeping down. But now it is much better here in Gosport, and which is what you're seeing at the moment, and much better here Portsmouth side as well. It's fascinating watching the preparations for a carrier deployment. It starts quite early on when notices go out to mariners the day before that the harbour will be closed for a period of time, and then the harbour entrance begins to get quieter. The normal level of shipping dips, and you're left in the end with just a few ships, the ferries in particular, the Gosport ferry and the White Link ferries, the passenger one and the car ferry, being the last one standing before the channel is completely shut and the carrier makes its way out. There's still a few yachts going about their business at this point in time, but very soon they will be prevented from leaving the harbour. So we're now looking at the scene in front of us, and you can see a number of tugs around the carrier. Her stern is still towards us, but now she's moved out from the jetty, which is to the right of our picture. Just in the distance there you can see the sort of yellowy brick buildings and the semaphore tower. That's where she was alongside, but now she's moved out. She will begin the process of being turned, and that's a combination of tugs pushing her and pulling her. So pushing her stern round towards the left, towards Fareham, and pulling her from the other direction to make that 180-degree turn. Now, if Mark just comes back out, we're coming to look now right at the start of the harbour again, as I was talking about the harbour being closed and yachts being prevented from going, and that's what we're just seeing happening now. This yacht has clearly not read the King's Harbour Master notices and thinks they can go out, but as you can see, the launch, which is part of the officialdom of the harbour, has told the yacht in no uncertain terms with the hoot of its hooter to turn around and go back in to Haslar Marina. Now that may seem, to those of you who aren't sailors, or those of you who don't know anything about ships of this size, a bit draconian. There's plenty of sea, isn't there? Well, yes, but the carrier is a vast, vast vessel and needs all the water she can get to make the transit safely. Number of reasons for this. First of all, once she's going, even with tugs helping control her, she is very difficult to stop, and any sort of yacht getting in the way like that one, well, unfortunately there's only going to be one winner in that contest, and that will be the carrier. She is 65,000 tonnes, 932 feet long, with a beam of 128 feet and a draft of 36 feet. Absolutely massive. The second largest ship in the Royal Navy, the biggest ship being, of course, her sister ship, HMS Prince of Wales, which is a few feet longer due to a few design changes for the second in class. So that's why they are really, really incredibly strict about how the harbour is patrolled and kept open. And that is why also the carrier will only ever leave or come into Portsmouth Harbour when we're at absolute high tide. And the water was rushing in earlier like rivers coming in as that level rose and rose and rose. And it needs to be high tide because she needs the maximum amount of water underneath her to enable her to go out safely. So a little bit of drama there as that yacht heads back into Haslar Marina, and once again we're back with HMS Queen Elizabeth. And you can see already that turning process is well underway. This is always an interesting part. and you can never quite tell how long it's going to take. Some days it seems to happen incredibly quickly. And on a couple of occasions where I've seen this in the past, there have been issues for some reason, and they've actually turned the carrier back again and had another attempt at it. But from what I can see today, it all appears to be going relatively well and relatively quickly. At least 5 tugs that I can count here. There'll be more around the other side. And you may be able to make out on your shot the ropes from the tugs going up at an angle just shy of 45 degrees up to the rear, the stern of HMS Queen Elizabeth. And you can only imagine the amount of power going through those lines. As with any ship movement of this type, it always starts very, very slowly and gradually speeds up as the inertia of the water is displaced. And that is what we're seeing happen today. So I'm going to ask my cameraman Mark, who's filming these wonderful pictures for us today on this BFBS Forces News live stream. I'm going to ask Mark just to zoom right into the front of the carrier on the right hand side, because then you'll be able to see the carrier's progress measured against the buildings of Paulsgrove, which is the town village area on Portsdown Hill. And if we can zoom in there, you'll see the front of the ship just making its way past those buildings, a clear indicator of the progress that's being made as that turning continues. Well, if you're just joining us, welcome along. It's Tim Cooper with you live on BFBS Forces News, going out live on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Hope you're well, hope you're enjoying these pictures. We always love to come down here and feature the carriers either leaving or returning home, and it is an absolute spectacle no matter what the deployment, and every time loads and loads of people come out to witness this spectacle as well. So why not let's take a look now at some of those who've come to see us today, and we'll just take a trip round the harbour again. Gosport, and then Fort Blockhouse, which is directly opposite where I'm standing today, the old submarine escape tower, the old Haslar Hospital beyond that, some very nice houses there out of the old buildings, round the Isle of Wight, and finally we get to the waving crowds. Can you give us a wave, everybody? Give us a cheer, come on! Totally spontaneous and without any encouragement from me. Well done, ladies and gentlemen. We've got people from all over the country. Some people I spoke to earlier from Yorkshire have come down to see their grandson, in this particular instance, off on his first trip away at sea, which is absolutely fantastic. And loads of other people with Navy heritage going back years and years and years, lining the round tower here. And it's a really good turnout, I've got to say, considering the horrendous weather earlier on today. A couple of hundred people here. I can also see a lot of people over the Gosport side. I can't quite see down the other side of the harbour, but there's likely to be a lot of people down there as well today. Yes, there are. I'm just seeing through the gap. So there we go, some of the interested parties who've come out to see HMS Queen Elizabeth on her way. It definitely is a waiting game, being part of a carrier departure. You can imagine it must be very stressful for those on board, because it is a delicate thing they're doing with a vast, vast ship. And yes, the harbour is big, but there are only certain amounts of areas that they can go into, and it's very much like an orchestra in some ways. Everything has to be choreographed correctly, and each of the moving parts has to work accurately. The tugs, of course, working in tandem with each other and with the carrier. And then all of the support craft here we see again, keeping the entrance to the harbour clear and open. And everything must go off correctly and in the right order and the right sequence for it to be a success. So if I was in charge of this ship, I would be at peak alertness now, and peak nervousness as well, to be honest. But I will be very glad when the operation is complete and we head out of the harbour. So let's once more go back round the vista that is Portsmouth Harbour entrance and take a look at the carrier. Seems to be a little bit of a pause at the moment, just from my assessment. I can't see much movement at the moment, but that isn't unusual. That does tend to happen when the turning process is underway. Maybe tugs have to reposition themselves, that's possible. Or maybe there's some other reason, but at the moment it's all relatively static. Indeed, I can see one of the smaller tugs, the second from the left, with two lights on, and that tug appears to be moving slightly more towards the front of the carrier, so maybe they're repositioning for the next stage of the turning process. The Victoria of Wight, the Whiteling ferry, is coming into our shot now, and as I mentioned earlier, the Whiteling ferries and the Gosport ferries are the last ferry traffic to operate, and they keep going right up until the last moment because they've got schedules to maintain, and those people need to get to the Isle of Wight and vice versa. So Victoria of Wight is on her way, and behind her once again we see the flagship of the Royal Navy, HMS Queen Elizabeth. And yes, since we last saw her, the tugs do appear to have repositioned themselves. So that's hopeful that the turning will begin again. I think indeed it has, the ship has, yes, started once more to turn around. Now this is the longest part of the process very often. After the ship has turned, things really do speed up, and the tugs propel her towards the entrance of the harbour really quite quickly. Let's talk a little bit more about the characteristics and capabilities of the Queen Elizabeth class of aircraft carrier. She's got a top operational speed of 25 knots, but in fact she's been tested up to 32 knots, which is roughly 29 miles per hour in operation, and a range of 10,000 nautical miles. On board are 3 36-man 139 class passenger transport boats, and I've been lucky enough to have a little go on one of those a few months ago. There are also 2 Pacific 24 rigid inflatable boats on board. If you're familiar with American carriers, you'll know that the Queen Elizabeth class of carrier is smaller than something like their Nimitz or Ford class, and they do have far fewer crew. But one of the beauties of the way the Royal Navy operates is that they really do upskill their crew, so people have multiple jobs, whereas very much on the American carriers to this day people have their one job and they do that, and that is all. The capacity on board is for 1,600 personnel, 250 troops, and that's a complement of 679. And yeah, it's happened very quickly, hasn't it? And it always tends to. We're almost at the point where she's gone through 60 degrees. And at that point her bow will be pointing directly back towards the Princess Royal Jetty in Portsmouth Naval Base. And we're a few minutes away from that. And then after that she'll just keep on going round, and then the bow will be pointing directly towards us. Spectacular sight, always watching this. Those tugs working together. Sort of 3 rings of vessels, 2 rings of vessels, no 3 actually, I was right the first time, 3 rings of vessels around the carrier. The tugs closest, some even touching, and some pulling with ropes. Then the next ring out from there are the police launches, making sure, whether for nefarious or accidental reasons, other ships might get in the way. So there's a ring there, and then further out the pilot boats and cutters keeping the harbour entrance safe. So a lot of people involved in this. It isn't just something that happens. And as I mentioned earlier, with the tide parameters and the weather issues, it can only happen at a certain time. And everyone is very disappointed when on occasion, whether the wind's too strong or the weather turns or there's an issue or whatever reason, when a scheduled departure doesn't happen. It's hugely disappointing for everybody here on the quayside, but it's also a bit of a headache for everyone involved in the prep, because it means they'll have to come back and do it all again the next day or the day after or whenever that may be. And Portsmouth is, of course, one of the homes of the Royal Navy, the home many people would say, but it is also a commercial port, and you've got a number of Brittany ferries, you've got commercial traffic, ships carrying bananas, a lot of them come into Portsmouth. Indeed, cruise liners do today as well. So this harbour is very much the shared utility. So when they publish the fact that the carrier is going to go, everybody really wants the carrier to go. And it's always a relief to me and to Mark when we see the carrier move away, because there's nothing worse than being here waiting for her to go and that not to happen. So I think we've reached that halfway stage in the turning process now. And now it's going at a good rate of knots. Within less than 5 minutes, I would estimate, the carrier will be directly facing us and beginning the short journey past historic old Portsmouth, Spice Island, as many of you will know it, and the beautiful old Customs House building there, and out past the historic Round Tower, which has been a beacon of hope for families of sailors for centuries. Hundreds of years people have come here to wave off ships or to hopefully scan the horizon to see ships returning home. I'm sure many of you will remember the pictures, glorious pictures after the Falklands conflict in 1982, when the ships were welcomed back. There were tens of thousands of people lining the entire length of the battlements here at the harbour entrance. A really spectacular sight, and every time a carrier comes home from a long deployment, that scene is echoed. Not of course coming back from a war situation, but still wonderful to see a homecoming take place. If you are just joining us, let me once more remind you that this is BFBS Forces News with Tim Cooper, talking you through the process of HMS Queen Elizabeth heading off on deployment. A routine period for the ship, not going very far, we don't think. She's going through some trials, and it comes after, of course, there was a period where the ship was in a difficult situation where she had to go to Scotland for repairs to a propeller shaft coupling, which was completed ahead of schedule, which was good news. She came down here and has been doing a lot of workup and operational training since then, and this, we think, is a continuation of that. And you thought I was lying when I said that this next bit would happen quickly. Well, it is, isn't it? Look, we're very, very close now to the point where she is towards us. If she started at 12 o'clock, then she's probably now at about 4 o'clock, and 6 o'clock we'll see her pointing directly to us. So we're really motoring through this phase of the operation. There are always comments online from people saying, "Oh, is she broken again? She's using tugs." Well, that of course is not the case. The tugs are there to make sure everything happens as smoothly and as safely as possible. They support the ship, they manoeuvre her, and they go out with her quite a way into the Solent before gradually diminishing in number, and then the ship is off on her way. Coming out of the harbour entrance here is only the first stage. The Solent itself has a number of nautical hazards. There are 3 markers out there with lights on that I can see today, more than 3 actually, 1, 2, 3, 6, a row of 3, then a row of 3 behind it. We can't quite get a camera shot of them at the moment, but they have lamps on them, green on the right, white in the middle and red on the left, and the carrier must head directly for those. And there are corresponding markers inside Portsmouth Harbour for when the carrier returns, because again, massive ship, sometimes not all that much water around her. So it has to be done very carefully, and the tugs aid in that process. So just because there are tugs does not mean there's an issue with the carrier or engines or propulsion system or anything. It is absolutely standard practice for a vessel of this size to utilise tugs to make her way out of this very, very difficult but also very, very beautiful harbour. And the lead tug, which I believe is SD Tempest, is now pulling the bow around. I'll bore you with a couple of facts about SD Tempest. She has rubbing strips at the front, which you might just be able to see, and they are grey in colour. Some of the older tugs that are around the ship still have black ones, and the designers were very careful, because grey on a grey ship does leave no mark, whereas the black ones used to leave black rubber marks all down the ship. So Tempest, new innovative design with the grey bumpers there, if you like, and it protects the ship's paint and doesn't leave as many marks. She is a vast tug, specially built for use with the carrier, and has all sort of thruster systems that can propel her in any direction at top speed. Totally remarkable, and controlled from a very specialised seat where the captain has a whole range of controls at his disposal to make the azimuth thrusters, as they're known, work. That's my word of the day, azimuth thruster. So, looking directly into our camera lens now, the carrier is pretty much pointing straight towards us. She'll go a few more degrees in the direction of Fareham, which is the left of our screen, and then she will begin to make her way towards us. You probably just glimpse the white ensign at the back there. So now if we widen our shot once more, Mark can show us that the harbour is totally silent. A few fishermen on the foreshore in front of us. One's just caught himself a nice mackerel by the look of it. Oh, bigger than that. Sorry, I was getting sidetracked with fishing there. Back in the real world. As you can see, the harbour is completely free of ships. Even the ferry traffic has stopped. The Gosport ferry now carefully moored up Gosport side. There'll be a corresponding one on the Portsmouth side, no doubt. And the scene is set for the ship to come towards us. So, from the time the ropes were untied on Princess Royal Jetty inside the dockyard to being in the right direction to leave the harbour, that has taken half an hour, which is pretty good. It's not the fastest I've seen it, but it's pretty good. It's certainly up there. I have seen ones in the past 40 minutes, 45, even 50 minutes for that procedure to take place. So I think everybody on board will be very pleased with that, and all looks well for the ship to continue. Really is a dark, gloomy day, isn't it? Earlier on, as I mentioned right at the start, absolutely teeming with rain, and we've had awful weather here, as much of the country has. The Great South Run had to be cancelled on Sunday, which takes place here in Southsea in Portsmouth, and indeed goes through the naval base, or the historic dockyard certainly, so it was a real shame for everybody who trained for that, and indeed the entire city. I think very quickly this class of carrier has become iconic in the way it looks. The twin island design. So the forward island is all about steering the ship, driving the ship, whereas the centre island, the rearward island really, is all about flying operations. And you can see the bridge window on the front of the first island. That's where all the careful driving operations will take place today. And behind that you'll notice a massive window on the right hand side as we're looking at it, which in fact is a sort of almost like a pod, several levels in there. I've been in there a couple of times, and it overlooks the 4-acre flight deck, and that's where flying operations take place from. You do get a stunning view there of the F-35 Lightning IIs taking off, or helicopters, or whatever aircraft may be. Absolutely perfect for coordinating those flying operations. And in a way, having the two separate islands helps delineate the key parts of what a carrier is for. Flying, of course, but also she is a massive ship that needs driving. So those two operations can take place in complete isolation from each other if needed, or indeed in complete unison, because they are, after all, the same ship. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I reckon 6 or 7 tugs around the carrier today. A couple of crew members on deck, walking over to the side. The radar array is spinning. It's all very calm. A lot of people here with their cameras getting pictures. A lot of people even speaking to crew members on board saying, we're on the round tower, we're standing here, give us a wave if you can. And that will be happening any minute now. Again, the ring of protection around the carrier in evidence with the police launches, the outermost, police ribs as well, and those tugs. Everything going well now. And I suspect in just a few moments' time we might get to hear a blast of the horn from HMS Queen Elizabeth, which should happen just as she arrives at the harbour mouth. Hope you're enjoying watching this live on BFBS, Forces News, YouTube and Facebook. We gather there's a lot of you who've joined us today, so thanks ever so much for doing so. And I'll just put a little shout out there for you that if you love your military stories, whether about our current day military, our partners or indeed our historic military, check out forcesnews.com. That's forcesnews.com, a brilliant place to understand all about our armed forces. But here we go, this is the moment we've been waiting for as the carrier goes from way distant to right upon us, and it seems like it goes in just a few seconds' time. So here we go, the exciting moment when HMS Queen Elizabeth leaves Portsmouth in a beautiful display of the Royal Navy's power and status around the globe. Little pockets of the ship's company are waving from where they can around, from the bridge wing. It's a new one on me. We got, yeah, lovely to see. And it's only when the ship gets this close that you realise the sheer scale and size of this vessel and why such precision is needed when she leaves the harbour. It's got to be right. You don't want an HMS Vanguard incident. That was Britain's last battleship that wedged herself in the mouth of the harbour as she was being towed away to be scrapped. She really did not want to leave, and Royal Navy people know that story and don't want their ship to end up in the same sort of place. But there she goes. And And we've got great shots as well of the people on the round tower waving away, as ever a mix of pride, joy and some sadness. But what an immense feeling it must be for those leaving on their first ever time away at sea with the senior service. I would imagine if being in the Royal Navy is your dream, it's come true if you're sailing on this ship today for the very first time. And congratulations to all that are. They've been through a way to get there, spending time at HMS Raleigh, learning the drills and learning the skills needed to be one of the very best at sea, one of the Royal Navy, on Britain's flagship, HMS Queen Elizabeth. The scale of the ship this close is only dwarfed by what it's like when you're on board, when you are lucky enough to walk onto the ship if you've been invited and see how vast she is inside, the huge hangars underneath the flight deck, the multiple floors, the facilities. It is immense, and it's designed to be incredibly flexible as a symbol of Britain's ability to project power around the globe and indeed take what's needed to wherever it may be needed. Sad times now for Portsmouth, because for the first time in quite a while the carriers are both out at sea at the same time. But that's as it should be. That's what they're designed for, although I know the city very much enjoys having them alongside when they are here in the city. So the people have all moved to the other end of the round tower to get their final glimpses of the ship as it makes its way out into the Solent and on to new adventures and new opportunities to learn and be prepared and be ready for whatever the nation needs in the future. Thank you once again for watching. Mark Hearn's been filming this. I've been Tim Cooper, and this has been a BFBS Forces News production going out to you live on our YouTube channels and our Facebook channel as well. Don't forget, one more shout out for forcesnews.com, our website. Loads of great information on there and wonderful films. And indeed, please follow us right across social media. Everything from Instagram to TikTok. No, I've done YouTube. What's the other one? Oh, I don't know. I've forgotten. It's all going terribly wrong. We'll leave it at that. Done Facebook. Thanks very much indeed for watching. There she goes, HMS Queen Elizabeth into the distance. And from us all here at the Round Tower, bye-bye.